scale. Our next conversation is going to bring that question home. If the United States is going to significantly expand housing supply, what should the next generation of production really look like? There are several possible paths. We could modernize and unlock more capacity within the manufacturing ecosystem that already exists. We could invest in new, highly automated factories designed from the ground up. Or we could use technology platforms, AI, and robotics to enable a more distributed network of regional manufacturers. Our next session is the future of supply, innovation at home. Moderating the conversation is Dr. Chris Rausch, joined by Rick Murdock, Sean Shields, and Ramtin Attar. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage as I figure out how to get the graphic back up. Chris, over to you.
All right, I recognize that we are probably the only thing keeping you from happy hour, so we will be prompt. We've got a few questions to kind of guide our conversation. But to kind of start off, I think it's interesting when we talk about the future of supply. As we kind of just learned, we had some interesting examples abroad. And it's, as an academic, I love that exercise of looking at maybe what other sectors, what other industries, what other countries are doing. But at some point in time, I think it's important to recognize that perhaps the solutions that are working, maybe still challenged, but working abroad, maybe they don't naturally translate to work well here. And so we need to have our own solutions. And so I think that's going to be kind of the guiding, thesis for our discussion today. And I'm excited to get into a little bit about robotics and AI as well. So I think we're going to have some interesting insights. And to kind of set up our discussion today, gentlemen, I'd like to kind of at least recognize that there are seemingly two, there's probably more, but at least for our purpose today, two different models for how the implementation of AI and robotics for housing production can look and work. And so joining us today, we have Rick Murdock, CEO and co-founder of Autovol. And I would say for the purpose of this discussion, you can kind of wear the hat of the big, fully automated factory. Big greenfield, big capital investment. And I believe you guys were the first fully automated 3D volumetric factory, and you're based in Idaho, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and so we have one model. It's the big capital investment, fully automated factory. Joining us as well is Ramtin Attar from Promise Robotics. And Promise Robotics is a firm that provides, I'll say, and you can correct me, tailored AI and robotics solutions for manufacturers through their factory as a service model. And what's really interesting, as we'll get into, is that it's not necessarily the big capital investment approach. It's much more of a distributed deployment of AI and robotics. So meeting companies where they're at and making, maybe not necessarily the same level of capital investment, but being able to equip a factory where it's at. And so these gentlemen here will provide different perspectives on that side. And then finally, we have Sean Shields, who is with the Structural Building Components Association, the Director of Strategic Partnerships. And I think you provide kind of almost like another perspective on the end user of these AI and robotics solutions. And so to kind of start the conversation, starting with you, Sean, we talk about these broad trends abroad. In your opinion, why does that not necessarily work for what we're seeing here stateside domestically?
It's a great question, Chris. Again, like our industry, we represent about 1,300 manufacturing locations across the US. Many of them don't use robotics, right? So we're sort of the opposite end of the spectrum from Rick here. And to answer your question, Rick, I think the answer is in the fact that we have 1,300 manufacturing locations. There's so much diversification in local markets across the US. I'm not going to say a single thing that everybody in the room here doesn't really already know. I'm just setting the table for the rest of our discussion. But that's the challenge that we face, is that you have all the local codes, you have all of the developers who work within those local areas, you have all the local preferences. There's not a lot of standardization or homogenization amongst what the market wants. across the U.S. I mean, we have housing in the title of this weekend or this summit, and there really is sort of this large segment of building construction. There's lots of other types of buildings, as we were just talking about with military, or whether it's agricultural or like commercial or whatever it is. There's a lot of buildings out there, and all of them have very different needs, very different requirements. I think one of the other things that really breaks down too is that, you know, in Europe, there's a lot of regulations that drive decisions that, because labor is such a governing part of it, there's a lot of regulations that sort of drive decisions for investment. And then there's also just a lot, they have a very different labor pool than we have here in the US, whether it's protections on labor, whether it's expectations for compensation and benefits, whether it's just the protections in the workplace. There's lots of things that make labor in Europe and other parts of the country or other parts of the world very much more expensive than what you can attain here in the US. So I think all of those things together are what's competing and making it very difficult, I think, for manufacturers just not to hit the button to let's just do AI and robotics today.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that adds a lot more nuance to it being, something that's not just the diversity of how many factors we have at play that really makes it so that we need our own solutions here. So to kind of add more clarity to that, I'm hoping, Rick, that you can tell us a little bit about your factory and maybe some of the choices that led you down the pathway of AI and robotics.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to add a little bit to what he was saying just then. I think part of the issue here in the U.S. is acceptance. I've spent time in Europe in developing what we've done, and I know that there's places of Europe where 60% of their construction is done through manufacturing, right? And so it's accepted by the public, it's accepted by officials a lot more there than it has been in the United States. What led me to do what I was doing is I've been doing it for all my life. I spent the first 25 years in the HUD business, manufactured housing, and then the last 25 years is all been in what we're doing today. And in the exercise that I went through in all these different years of experience was basically got down to labor, right? And where was your labor? And there was one time where there was a lot of labor. And in manufacturing plants, it's a lot of labor for some work. Right, and so you could take a young man, regardless if he was 20 or 25, and you could wear him out in a day's time, right? Because it is heavy lifting most of the day, right? And so I looked at that, and then I looked at the labor pool today that we have versus what we had back then. And then since the pandemic, our labor has really shrunk. And then experienced labor on top of that has even shrunk more. And then on top of that, you got young people coming out of school that aren't running out there saying, hey, I want to be in construction, I want to be in construction, because it lost its excitement, I think. So it moved me towards automation robotics because I realized what could be done through using a brand new tool, and that's robots, right? No different than a hammer, it's a tool. It has to have someone else use it in order to make it work. And part of that was because of labor issues. Trying to find that labor and trying to keep that labor going nonstop. Because a manufacturing plant's not like construction work. You've got full-time employees. It's a business, and you have to feed them every day, right? And so I looked at that, the labor issue, and then I also looked at taking the heavy lifting off people and putting it on machines so that people would endure and stay with what they're doing much longer, right? And not wear them out. So there was lots of reasons for that. One of the side benefits that I'd hoped for and found to be true is we bring robotics and bring software and bring all those things into a manufacturing environment. All of a sudden, the young people and the ones that you want to get into construction, they found it sexy again, right? And so they're anxious to get in there and learn something new and do something different than what we've been doing decade after decade.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Brampton, I'm curious from your background and your journey, in kind of working and interfacing with clients, like what's the main driver that you see that leads them towards the solutions that you're working on with AI and robotics?
Sounds good. So I'll just add a little bit, so a few words on the AI, because I always say AI has become the new greenwash. So it's just very simple. So I'm using AI. Yes, you have an iPhone, you open up your ChatGPT, you're using AI. But it's very, I think it's important to really understand what it really means, and particularly when you talk about building component manufacturing, we're not just talking about AI, we're talking about physical AI. And the difference is, AI has advanced enough where we can produce drawings, we can automate drawings, we can generate images, we can do estimating. Those are all going to accelerate even more, really fast. The part that is really we consider to be the next generation of what AI is going to unlock and what we started to do over 6 years ago is how does AI manipulate the real world? How do you actually pick up a material? How do you understand the grain of the wood? How do you do fitting of things? These are the challenges that the AI traditionally has not been really good at to really manipulate the world. But that is going to unleash a whole new sort of era for what we consider to be the future of building component manufacturing. So that's the angle we come in. It's not sort of a just AI all catchword for all. But I want to sort of build up on what you were mentioning on the labor, right? Because when we started, and the way we work is we work directly with the home builder, but we also work with operators as well. So we say, hey, here's the technology, we have the best-in-class operation, you can learn from it, and you can operate the exact same thing. We brought some of the largest framing companies to the facility. We said, we are open, come and visit us. And to our surprise, some of the feedback we got was on a number of things. First of all, they said, the idea that you can produce all these components under one platform, under one roof, is a form of a skill that we actually do not have. For me, it's easy to go get a panel factory, just produce walls, cheap walls, it's a race to the bottom. But the ability to do walls, stairs, floors, everything, and have one platform to do it all is a skill that we need to be able to scale. So we really thought about what we do. It's not actually about robotics, it's about digitization and repeatability of a form of construction that you can scale. That's where scalability comes from. The other part where we sort of was very interesting for us, where again, this is a feedback from the customers who are coming to us, it says, yes, in my factory, I'm producing a lot, but it's a chaos. The robots are setting the tone. It's highly organized. I know down to the centimeter of my material. I know my consumable. I know all my these things. So things that we often don't think about from an operational perspective, but they become important, especially when you start to scale. And then there's a whole sort of a training side of things. How do you get the right talent? How do you get the right people? How do you get them, really set them up? So it's been interesting from the tech side all the way to the labor side, and then the interaction with the builders.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that a little bit, because I think what's interesting, and even myself will admit this as a researcher, it's often like I go right to the tool and I'm like, that's great, I want to use that. But it sounds like the value of actually bringing these solutions to, a factory is the processes that are required to be able to integrate that. And I feel like that's like something that is not well, known or recognized. And I feel like, push back if there's more nuance to that, but I feel like the value of bringing a robot to a factory is everything else that's required before you bring the robot.
Robot is just a distribution system. That's all it is. It's really just the actuator of a process. And in our business model, like frankly enough, we're actually trying to, we're successful if we use less robots. In other words, if your robot is more skillful, that's where you want to get to. That's why AI becomes important. So the idea is to actually break the traditional manufacturing mindset of using a lot of robots and use one robot, two robots that collaborate and could do more. It's the same parallel to the skilled workforce. You use 3 workforce or you use 6 workforce together. So which one is more skillful? So robot just becomes the actuator, but how do you take a complicated process and make it highly distributable, highly flexible, and highly repeatable across mass market? That's where the potential of AI comes in. Today we work with builders, right? They build master communities, and every builder's spec is different. We feed that spec into AI. Right. So this is the code that you need to meet, and we have generalized it enough to be able to flexibly act on it.
That's great. I want to kind of direct our conversation towards scalability, because I feel like that's another inherent advantage with, we bring robotics and AI. Again, I think there's an underlying process we're fundamentally changing the process that allows us to scale. And I feel like, especially in light of the future of demand, panel that we heard that there is this demand that's coming down the pipeline. And so on the topic of scale, I think there's some interesting nuance here we can probably pull out from SBCA, really wide, 13,000 different factories or members?
1,300.
1,300, sorry, 1,300 members. So what, in your experience, are some of the benefits and maybe even like challenges with your members, just having the fact that there's such a wide spectrum of maybe equipment and automation use? So in your view, what are the main ways that we scale these solutions?
Yeah, before I answer that question, I think, an important thing to focus on here is, why industrialization to begin with? Like, why is this really a very viable approach? And really, I think in our minds, for our industry, a big piece that we don't talk about very well, and it's really hard to monetize, is the precision that you get from offsite manufacturing, right? When you take all of those, at least in this country, traditional on-site activities, and you move them all off to offsite, and whether it's a robot, an AI, or it's at least some sort of advanced mechanization, you get precision. And the precision and accuracy and quality leads to passing your framing inspections the first time through, or whatever it is, right? And those are real dollars. And I think one of the things that at least the industry is really poor at right now is figuring out what's the value of that and communicating what's the value of that precision. So when component manufacturers are looking at their existing manufacturing processes, which are highly mechanized, but they are definitely not robotics. And they are right now very behind the curve at how do they adopt artificial intelligence into their software platforms in a way that's going to be, produce very effective return on investment. I think one of the things that they really struggle with is that any solution that they look at now is a significant capital investment. And so, their ROI timeframes are like, I was just having this conversation with one of the leaders of our association, is 2 years or less. So if I'm going to spend $1.5 million on something, I got to get that return in 1.5 years. And I don't know, there's not a lot of people here who work in the component manufacturing industry, but the margins there are not very big. So you start talking about massive amounts of volume that you have to be able to have throughput on in order to cover that ROI. So I think that's one of the first challenges that today's manufacturer who's feeding most of the builders in this country are facing. I think the second thing that they're facing is, Rampton's great, and whether it's him or another robotics company, there's a lot of knowledge about how to apply robotics effectively, but not necessarily in the space of construction. And so for most of these manufacturers, they're having to go through R&D with Rampton and all the others, trying to figure it out of like, how do we apply this to our process? And I absolutely agree with you. It would be better if they all just abandoned their current process and started over from scratch. But I don't know a single business owner who's very comfortable doing that. So I think that's another challenge too that you're facing is how do you figure out a process that they're comfortable with? And finally, I would say, the last challenge is just one of, we keep on talking about the automotive industry. And in this last session, the quote that always comes back to me is, I think, indicative of some of the fallacy sometimes we apply to the automotive industry, which is, most of the automotive industry was formed on sort of this mentality of Henry Ford, and he was famous for saying, you can have any color car you want as long as it's black. There's this perception that you have lots of choice in the automotive industry when you don't at all. But in the housing industry, they absolutely give you anything you want, right? And so trying to accommodate, at least where we are at right now in the residential space, of being able to provide a homeowner whatever it is they want, that's a very difficult thing to try to standardize in a manufacturing off-site space and deliver into the field right now.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, Rick, you're
I couldn't agree more. It's very difficult. And you touched on another thing too, and that's the integration. Because I know I experienced I didn't know anything about robots. I didn't know anything about programming or any of that. And I had an integrator that didn't know anything about construction.
It's a great place to start.
It's a great place to start. And so we spent 8 months, solid months of just discovery, of them understanding how I had to build, the codes I had to build by for all the different regions I'm in, and then them trying to match the automation and the tool with what we had to build, right? And it took us about 8 months of just discovery of understanding, okay, now we're ready to look at what a facility is going to look like and how we're going to build. And you made another point that was important, standardization. I would tell you from my experience, I love automation, robotics. I think it's the wave of the future. But I also think that the only way it really works and it can be scaled is to standardize and not do something different every time. I don't think that, in my experience, that automation robotics is good for custom building. I don't think it was meant for that. It's meant for more of a standard type product that you can standardize and get volume out of. And to another point you made is the cost. If you're going to build a manufacturing facility, the first thing you have to do is, it's not one of those build it and they'll come. That's not what happens. If you build it and they don't come, then you're out of business and you just lost the entire capital that you put into it. And then it's got to be continually fed. We call it feeding the beast, right? You've got a manufacturing plant that's going to produce 5, 6, 7 a day, then you have to have 5, 6, 7 a day to do that. And standardization, not only in factory and what you're going to build, but also here's the real thing about manufacturing that makes it, there's two things. You have to have the sales in order to run it consistently. And then second of all, it's not just the sales, it's the timing of the sales. You're going to build a project, and here's what most people don't recognize, is that from the time an architect takes a project that I'm going to build until I can lay my first board out in the plant to build, it takes anywhere from 6 to 8 months just to get it ready to lay your first boards and start to build. And I'm going to take that same project that it took 6 to 8 months to get ready, and I'm going to build it in 3 weeks. And then I need another one that took 6 to 8 months. And so it's very difficult. And so you can't just have to have business, you have to have a pipeline of business. And as you're building one, the other one needs to be ready to go on the line, because when that one stops, the other one starts, right? And so just the processes that we have to go through here to build is unbelievable why it would take 8 months to get something ready that's going to take 3 weeks to build, right? And so we could certainly standardize some things there, and I think it could make it easier on all of us.
You mentioned something that I want to maybe just pull out and ask Rampton on, which is, and I don't disagree with you for the record, that with an automated facility, you have to standardize a lot of things. But I'm curious, like at some point, there seems to be this, maybe pun intended, promise that automation and robotics does not necessarily need to always have that same final end result be standardized. So, like, what happens in that ecosystem, and maybe Rampton, like, what needs to be standardized versus how do you still achieve some degree of customization?
Exactly. So we never build the same thing twice. If you come to our factory, one day we're doing single, the other day is a duplex. That duplex has probably 10 different elevations, depending on what the builder sells. We have 4-plex, we have 6-plex. The floor cassettes, each one is different depending on where the beam goes. That's how you solve that through AI, right? High variability, low volume manufacturing. That's what we spent the last few years, because we believe the system integrator model didn't work. It was all about custom. If you can create a robotic system, copy paste the same equipment across mass market that can build anything, that's the scale. I use this number, last factory that we deployed, we got the occupancy permit on July 30th. The first duplex came out August 15th out of that factory. The other part that we did was we said, most people think setting up a factory is about buying machinery. That's where the big challenge is. Your biggest problem is upstairs. How do you get your estimating, your modeling, your manufacturing files, and that's what people underestimate. So if we can decouple the brain of the factory from machinery, so no matter where you put the robotics, the factory, like in our factories, we don't have anybody doing estimating, nobody's doing modeling. They just received the files from Promise Cloud. All they do, they just do a scheduling of what they need to produce and they order material. That's, again, adds to the deployability, adds to the scalability. So is as much about how do you create a business model that you can go and, exactly to your point, build the capacity, your selling capacity, the demand, and how do you create a capital stack and the technology stack that can support that. That's become sort of a pathways to unlocking scale.
Yeah, it's great. And I mean, so we're talking about a lot of the benefits and perhaps the challenges to get there. But I'm just curious to kind of, turn the table a little bit. Like, what are some of the challenges or maybe the risks that are involved when you are bringing automation and robotics into the picture? And I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and start with that. I mean, feel free to give a personal, story. You don't have to get too specific and share kind of, war stories. But what are some of the risks that people who are thinking of maybe having an automated facility that they should be aware of?
I'll chime in on that, I guess. I think the risk in that is having enough people that understand what that is and understands the automation piece, understands the integration piece that can actually help do that. It's here in our country, it's new to our industry, right, to jump up and build plants with robotics. It's common in cars, it's common in everything we own has been manufactured. But in construction, it's not very common. And so finding those integrators that can understand how to put all that together so it operates. And then changing your mindset. It's a different mindset if you're operating a automated manufacturing plant versus a manual plant. It's just different. And it's finding that education out there. And it's not really finding the education of the people to go out and operate the plant. That actually turned out to be much simpler than what I expected it to be. But it's that upfront knowledge to set it up correctly, to be successful with it.
Are there any times where, I would imagine some of the risks could be like your equipment goes down. And if we're not having an automated facility, we have workers, like that seems to be a little bit, easier to address. We don't have those same challenges. I don't know if any of you want to jump in on that, but.
Yeah, so first of all, every machine breaks down, every machine's down. That's why, we have things like OEE, right? So before you put a product somewhere, you need to have a really good past OEEs at, whether you're a world-class or acceptable OEE, you need to have understanding of, where the breakpoints is and how you quickly recover for those things. That's very common in manufacturing, even if you're operating a truck. Something's going to happen to your truck. You just know how to handle it and what to do. There's no difference in that. But I totally agree with your point, that building that culture. Because when you go into automation, when you go into manufacturing generally, you got to have the continuous improvement mindset, right? This is not project-based anymore. It's process-based. You've got to have the right accountability. You've got to have the right processes. You need to have the right feedback loop. We had cases where you get the floor wrong, your site crew is going to pay for it. So we sent our factory crews to the site. We said, you're going to go fix it. You're going to learn how much trouble that could cause everybody. Or if the site crew does something, we bring them back to the factory. We bring them and say, look how they are doing things. What sort of a feedback you provide. That culture, that integration is something we don't typically do in the construction. And to me, that's everything. It goes back to the talent. How do you build, before you even talk about technology, do we have a path to build the talents we need to scale this? That's the path to scaling.
I think a few things that I would probably add to that, not to be a downer, because I should make it very clear that I believe that while we're not there now, it makes more sense to be where Rick's at in the long term. Like we really need to move as many of the processes that are going on the job site off the job site into a manufacturing space for all the things that we've talked about already. I think the biggest challenge is how do we get from where we are right now to there? Because when you look at least the customer, the home builder, they're still building houses the same way they did 100 years ago. So how do we fundamentally change with a manufacturer their processes that they're using right now? I mean, I think about, again, taking a step back just to what our industry has done in the last 20 years in automation, right? Really what we talk about most of the time with that is we're always chasing the bottleneck. Buy a new piece of equipment. Now that's really fast. It's feeding wood through the process really fast. Well, now the next process is really slow. Okay, we automate that and make that much quicker. Oh, now we're stuck over here. In the end, your greatest bottleneck is at the door. The finished product's there and it just builds up and you can't load it onto trucks fast enough to deliver it to job sites. Like you're always chasing that bottleneck. So I think that's a process that the manufacturers need to figure out how to get out of. I think for Rampton and all the other robotic manufacturers out there, that's another process too of like coming into today's modern manufacturer and trying to figure out where do they fit best in that process and how do they partner with the manufacturer to implement something that's very efficient and actually delivers on the promises that it offers, right? I think, unfortunately, in our industry, there's been a few robotics companies that have gone in, have tried it out, and have gone bankrupt. And so, there is a long memory in that manufacturing space too of like how it hasn't worked. And so you have some skepticism that never helps anything, right? Those are all surmountable challenges, right? We can overcome all of those things, but figuring out the right way, the right order to do that, I think is the challenge that we find before ourselves right now. And then on top of it all, again, going back to feeding the beast, that's the other challenge. Right now, we're just like how the home builders were 20 years ago. As housing ramped up, you just threw bodies at it. As it scaled back down, you let go of those bodies, right? You didn't worry where they went because the next time you ramped back up, you just hired more bodies. I think we've all recognized in the residential construction space that doesn't exist anymore. That's not possible. So, for the manufacturer, though, it's still easier for them to try to throw bodies at it and take bodies away than it is to make a huge capital investment. And I think that's something you have to get over in the mindset of the business owner today, too.
It's a great segue for the last question before we have the audience some questions and participation. So my last kind of question to guide our conversation is what do you all think needs to change here in the U.S. To make AI and robotics scale for housing solutions? If you had to say kind of one thing that you think needs to change, what would that be?
You want me to start? I mean, I would argue, going back to a point we made really much earlier, which is we need the customer to fully appreciate the benefit that offsite construction provides them. The way that they do their cost centers today, they don't put much value or stock or have a process to truly capture the cost that offsite manufacturing provides them, right? Whether it's for precision, it's the reduction in cycle time, so the reduction in carry costs. There's so many benefits there, but today's builder isn't really set up to fully capture that. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, that if you can get the customer to really fully understand and appreciate the value that offsite provides to them, they're going to be much more receptive, in which case you're going to see manufacturers much more willing to retool quickly and more plants like Rick's to pop up because the customer is going to be demanding it.
And I'd like to spring off that too, because you're absolutely right. But it's not just the customer, it's the customers as far as manufacturing goes. Because here's where we're at today. Developers, a lot of them don't understand modular manufacturing. They've been doing it the same way they've always done it. Like most everyone else, people are resistant to change, but a major change, when you're changing the way you do something that you've been doing forever, using general contractors and so forth, is a big decision to make. So you have to be committed if you're going to do that. Then you leave that and you go to architects. Not a lot of architects understand modular either. They're doing their architectural studies for what they've done since time began. They're drawing it up if you're going to go out there and field and build it. Now they have to understand that, my architectural piece of this has to be a little bit different too, because it's going to be constructed differently. It's going to be constructed in pieces instead of a whole. And then you got general contractors. And general contractors, the nature of them is they've done the same thing they've done forever. They're working with contractors that when there's work, that's great, they're right there. When there's not, they let them go home, right? The other thing they're accustomed to is they're in managing the whole job. So if you looked at general contractors from a standpoint is they have a hard time making an instrument because they feel like they're losing something in the deal, because a manufacturer is not a contractor. A manufacturer is a supplier. No different than if I bought a load of lumber. If you're working with a manufacturer and you're having a module delivered to your site, and so now you become a supplier. And it's that closeness that you have to be very successful, to have all those engaged in a project so that it goes seamless and comes out to be a positive project.
Rampton, I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
Yeah, That's a big question, right? I go back to the first project we did a few years ago. It was our first single family, 2-story with a basement, and we got lucky. The site right beside our erection was being a stick frame. Exact same houses, and we just got lucky there. So we went 7 a.m. By 12:30, we had the roof up on the second floor, everything done, locked up. We moved away. This is our panel's approach. The site beside us was going for 3 weeks. There was a mess outside. And every hour we added a floor, the framers came out. They just watched. They went back in. And at some point, they came to me and said, what are you guys doing? What's this all about? And at that point, I was just asking the same question you were asking, is that how would you see this and then not ask yourself why we're not doing more of this? And this was in the dead of winter, right? Dead of winter. So to me, it comes back to future of jobs. How do we think about future of jobs and labor? Because as long as you treat the industry in a precarious way, that I go through the cycles, when there's a good time, I charge as much as I can, I make money, but when there's a downtime, I'm gonna just drop all my prices. You would never invest in the future of talent. You would just never do, and that's an industry would not go. Economic 101, the talent you feed an industry will shape its future. That's what you need.
So we'll have an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. I have one kind of personal interest one. This one's for free, I think. But humanoids, is that ever going to be in the future of construction? And real quick, because we don't have time to elaborate on that, but are the humanoids coming to a factory near you?
Yeah, so I'll give you our perspective. So the reason the humanoid is flourishing is because there's a lot of data available for humanoids to learn general tasks. Construction is not general tasks. So maybe you could get a humanoid to do some general tasks, but to do construction tasks, you need data to train those humanoids. So for example, to pick up wood, we had to build our own data sets. So we trained multiple years of data sets on top of NVIDIA to be able to get a robot to look at a piece of wood and measure it. So if you're able to access that data and train humanoids, maybe you can start to do some of the tasks. At the end of the day, it's not about so much the form factor, is about does that AI model, does that reasoning model of that humanoid is going to have the access to the type of construction data sets and things to be trained on it. That's, I think, the sort of the core of the question to address.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? Or are all just ready to get to happy hour? Okay, we have a few.
Okay. I think one of the problems why architects fail to succeed in designing for modular is that they're trying to apply a conventional design bid build approach in the first place to modular. So I didn't even know the term design bid build until I started modular. It's just the way we always built things, right? I learned recently, for example, I'll give you an example, ComCheck. Okay, energy code, right? Normally in a conventional design bid build, we're gonna do ComCheck at a point where the mechanical designs are set and the lighting designs are set. And that's usually at the end of DD, okay? Now I have all the data I need to input for my envelope ComCheck, right? And then I can run ComCheck because I have to meet the minimum credits at that point. In modular, I've learned if you're running that in DD or CDs, it's already too late. You have to create a theoretical model at the outset of the project with all those assumptions in place, right? If it makes sense. So the process is almost backwards. I have to know what I'm going to build, and then I have to develop that at the conceptual stage, and then I need to check it all the way through to CDs. And that's a fundamental shift in thinking, because in design, normally we grow it like a plant. We start with conceptual designs, then we develop it, we bring in the structural engineer after we've got our schematics done, we bring in the MEP later on in the process. Sometimes we only have narratives through DD, right? Then we get into CDs, we develop it further. I have to start with the structural systems, the standardized structural systems that we talked about. I have to have standardized mechanical systems so I can run my ComChecks in the first place. Because you can imagine what happens if you're running this and you've already started producing 200 boxes, it's already too late, or it's going to be a very substantial cost to fix it.
Thank you. On top of all of that, I think one of the other key factors is the architects sell time, which is why it takes so long for things to get done. And instead of selling time, we as architects should sell value. And I think that's how we can start to change some of these timelines that are that Mr. Murdock is talking about. Those three entities that hold each other hostage, with the architect being the first, it is tied to timeline, and the longer it takes to do a set of DDs and construction documents and schematic design documents, that's what holds the projects hostage.
One thing, we didn't talk about this at all, but you raise a really good point. I mean, there's a lot of things broken with the design process in this country, right? You touch upon some of it, but it's one of those things where, whether it's the architectural firm, it's the structural engineering firm, it's the general contractor, who's held accountable. And ultimately, this is all being done by human beings who all make mistakes. And there's conflicts all over the place. There's things that aren't called out. There are things that are input wrong. When do you catch those problems? And who fixes them? And who's responsible for all that? I know in our industry, we are usually the ones holding the bag at the end, between us and the people who are actually installing and building the things in the field, right? The people that are installing in the field, and they realize it's broken. And the worst case scenario is they don't tell anyone, they just try to fix it, make it work, and they move on. And then the building has performance issues later on, right? That's typically what happens. The slightly better is it gets back to the manufacturer of like, fix this thing, you've designed it wrong. And it's like, well, no, it's the spec, but the spec is wrong. I think that's one of those things that also needs addressed. I think the modular industry, like to your point, fixes that better because you have to do everything up front. But that's not what mainstream construction is right now. So I mean, again, if we're talking about all this, that's another part of this that needs to get fixed, is how we do building design in this process, and at the point at which the manufacturer, the offsite manufacturer, is involved in that process.
Thank you, Chris, Rick, Ramton, and Sean. Quick round of applause for a very forward-looking conversation.